Get your filthy arm off my table now. I said, move. You're disgusting. Preston Langford shoved his chair back. His lip curled like he had just stepped in something rotten. Sir, I barely touched you. You spilled your dirty coffee near me. His voice filled the entire cafe. Near my cup. This is exactly why people like you don't belong in places like this. Irene Whitaker sat perfectly still, her hands folded on her lap. Her voice came out soft and steady. I'm sorry. It was an accident. An accident? No. Clean yourself up and get out of my sight. She was an elderly retired schoolteacher, a grandmother, but what nobody in that cafe knew was who her son was. Man, talking to her like that? That's just wrong. Let's get into it. Let me take you back. Just before that moment, Collinsville, Virginia, a small quiet town about an hour outside Washington, D.C. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where shop owners wave at you through glass windows, where the same families have lived on the same streets for generations. It was a morning with that first real bite of autumn. Leaves were just starting to turn gold and copper along the edges of Main Street. 2 blocks down, vendors were setting up the weekly farmers market. The smell of fresh bread and apple cider drifted through the cool air. Right in the middle of town sat a little coffee shop called Maeve's Roost. Exposed brick walls, mismatched wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu with handwritten specials. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled behind the counter like it had its own heartbeat. This wasn't some corporate chain. This was the kind of place where your name was already on the cup before you ordered. Irene Whitaker walked in at her usual time. She wore a cream-colored cardigan buttoned to the top. Reading glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck. Her leather handbag was old, cracked along the strap, but she carried it like it was worth a fortune. The bell above the door jingled. Maeve Donnelly, the owner, looked up and smiled instantly. Mornin', Irene. The usual? You know it, honey. Small decaf with cream. 1 blueberry scone. Same order every Saturday. Since she retired, Irene held the door open for a young mother struggling with a stroller. She complimented the toddler's tiny sneakers. She dropped an extra $1 in the tip jar without looking at it. Just muscle memory from a lifetime of small kindnesses. She taught 3rd grade at Collinsville Elementary. Half the adults in this town once sat in her classroom. She taught them to read. She taught them manners. She wiped their tears when their parents forgot to pick them up. Her husband, Robert, had been a postal carrier. Good man, reliable hands. He died of cancer when their son, Garrett, was a boy. Irene raised that boy alone. Worked 2 jobs some summers. Never complained. Never asked for a thing. Now she was retired. Peaceful. Saturday mornings at Maeve's were her small luxury. She took her usual seat by the window. Sunlight warmed the left side of her face. She unfolded a napkin across her lap, set her scone on a small plate, and took her first slow sip. For a while, the world was gentle. Then a black Escalade pulled up outside. It parked diagonally across 2 spots. The engine cut off with a heavy thud. The driver's door swung open wide, almost hitting a passing cyclist. Preston Langford stepped out, tailored navy blazer, a silver watch that caught the morning light. He was already talking into his phone, loud enough that people on the sidewalk turned their heads. He didn't hold the door for the woman walking out behind him. He walked straight to the counter, cutting in front of 2 people who were already waiting. Maeve's smile disappeared. She knew Preston. Everyone in Collinsville did. He was a real estate developer who had moved to town recently. Since then, he had bought up half a dozen properties on the east side. Old homes, black-owned businesses, affordable apartments. He tore them down and put up luxury condos. Long-time tenants were pushed out with eviction notices. Small shop owners who couldn't afford the new rent simply vanished. Preston didn't negotiate. He acquired. He treated Collinsville like a chessboard, and the people who lived there like pieces he could sweep off whenever he pleased. He ordered loudly. A complicated custom drink. He called Maeve's prices highway robbery for a small-town dump. He tapped his credit card on the counter before she even finished making it. Then he turned around, scanning for a seat. His eyes landed on the small round table by the window. Irene's table. There was 1 empty chair across from her. Preston walked over, pulled the chair out, and sat down without a word. Without asking. Without even looking at her. He set his cup down hard. Some of it splashed onto the table. Irene glanced up. She offered a polite smile. She had no idea what was about to happen. For a moment, nothing happened. Irene sipped her coffee. Preston scrolled through his phone. Two strangers sharing a small table by the window, separated by less than 2 feet of worn oak. Then Irene reached for her scone. Her elbow barely grazed Preston's cup, just the faintest tap. A few drops of coffee slid down the side and pooled on the table. Preston looked down at the drops like they were poison. His head turned slowly toward Irene. His nostrils flared. His jaw tightened so hard, the muscles in his neck popped. "Did you just touch my cup?" Irene blinked. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You put your hands near my drink." His voice was low at first, controlled, like a man choosing his words carefully, not out of kindness, but out of cruelty. "Do you have any idea how revolting that is?" "Sir, it was just an accident. I barely—" "Don't talk to me." He grabbed a napkin and wiped the side of his cup with exaggerated disgust. He held the napkin between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. Then he dropped it on Irene's side of the table. "There. That's yours now." Irene said nothing. She folded her hands in her lap and looked down at her scone. The blueberries had gone blurry through the moisture building in her eyes. The café had gone quiet. The espresso machine let out a long, slow hiss. A spoon clinked against a saucer somewhere behind them. Maeve stood frozen behind the counter, a milk pitcher still in her hand. Preston wasn't done. "You know what I can't stand?" He wasn't talking to Irene anymore. He was talking to the room. His voice carried across every table, every corner. "You go to a nice place, you try to enjoy your morning, and then someone like this." He gestured toward Irene with an open hand. "Just plants herself right next to you, touching your things, breathing on your food." Irene's lips pressed together. Her chin dipped slightly, but she didn't move. A woman at the next table shifted uncomfortably. Her husband stared hard at his plate. No one spoke. Preston leaned closer to Irene, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Sharp, expensive, suffocating. "Where are you even from?" he asked. "Because this isn't your kind of place. Trust me." Irene's voice came out so soft it barely reached the next table. "I've lived in this town for decades, sir." Preston laughed. Not a real laugh. A sound designed to make her feel small. "Decades. And you still don't know how to behave in public." He picked up his coffee and took a long, deliberate sip. Then he set it down hard enough to make Irene flinch. That was when he noticed the crumbs. A few tiny pieces of Irene's scone had fallen near the center of the table. Barely visible. The kind of crumbs anyone would leave. Preston stared at them. His face twisted. "Are you an animal?" he said. "Look at this mess. You're eating like a pig." Irene reached for her napkin to clean up. Her hand was trembling. "Don't bother." Preston stood up. His chair screeched against the tile floor. The sound cut through the cafe like a knife. "I've lost my appetite." He grabbed his cup and looked down at Irene. She was still sitting with her hands in her lap. Her cream cardigan, her beaded glasses chain, the cracked leather handbag hanging from the back of her chair. Everything about her was quiet. Everything about her said, "I'm not a threat." Preston saw something different. "You owe me a coffee," he said. "You contaminated mine." "Sir, I didn't." "Open your mouth one more time." Silence. Preston turned toward the counter. "Maeve, make me a new one, and move this woman to another table." Maeve set the milk pitcher down slowly. Her voice was careful, but firm. "Preston, she didn't do anything wrong. She's been sitting there since before you came in. I don't care when she got here. I'm not sitting next to that." He didn't say a slur. He didn't need to. The word that hung in the air like smoke. Maeve didn't move. Preston's eyes narrowed. "Fine. You want to take her side? That's your choice." He turned back to Irene. "Get up." Irene looked at him. For the first time, there was something in her eyes beyond patience. It was pain. Deep, old, familiar pain. The kind that comes from hearing the same tone in 100 different voices across a lifetime. She began to stand. Slowly. Her knees ached. You could see it in the way she braced one hand against the table. "Faster," Preston said. She reached for her handbag. Her fingers fumbled with the strap. Her scone was still sitting on the plate. One bite taken. Preston exhaled sharply through his nose. He grabbed her cup of coffee, the small decaf with cream she ordered every Saturday, and turned it over. Coffee poured across the table. It dripped over the edge and onto Irene's lap. Warm brown liquid soaked into her cream cardigan. It ran down her skirt. It pooled on the tile beneath her shoes. Irene gasped. Her hands flew to her chest. The coffee had been warm, not scalding, but the shock hit harder than any burn. She stood there, dripping, speechless. Preston set the empty cup down on the table with a dull thud. "Now you match the mess you made." The cafe was frozen. People sat in that room. Not one of them stood up. Not one of them said a word. A little girl at a corner table tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, why did that man do that?" The mother pulled the girl closer and whispered, "Don't look, sweetheart." Maeve came around this counter fast. She had napkins in one hand and fire in her eyes. "Preston, you need to leave right now. You are not welcome here anymore." Preston smirked. "Careful, Maeve. I own the building next door. Yours could be next." He straightened his blazer. He adjusted his silver watch. Then he looked down at Irene one last time. She was trying to wipe the coffee from the photograph. It had slipped out of the side pocket of her handbag when she stood up too fast. A small, wallet-sized photo in a thin plastic sleeve. A man in a postal uniform smiling wide. Her husband, Robert. The coffee had soaked through the sleeve. The edges of the photo were turning brown. Irene's fingers moved gently across the image. Her lips were pressed tight. Her chin trembled, but she didn't cry. Not in front of him. She wouldn't give him that. Preston looked at the photo. He looked at Irene, and he laughed. "Sentimental," he said, the way someone says pathetic. Then he picked up his phone, stepped over the puddle of coffee on the floor, and walked toward the door. Maeve was already dialing for help. Her voice shook as she spoke into the phone. "I need someone at my shop, please. A man just assaulted an elderly woman. He poured coffee on her. Yes, she's still here. She's shaking." Irene lowered herself back into her chair. Coffee was still dripping from her cardigan. The photo of Robert pressed flat against her chest. A young woman, college age, curly hair pulled back, rushed over and knelt beside her. "Ma'am, are you okay? Can I get you anything?" Irene looked at her. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at the photograph again. The coffee stain was spreading. Robert's smile was fading behind a brown blur. And for the first time, Irene's composure cracked, just barely. A single tear slid down her cheek and landed on the back of her hand. She wiped it fast, like she was embarrassed. "I just wanted my Saturday," she whispered. "That's all I wanted." Outside, Preston leaned against his Escalade, laughing into his phone. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. The patrol car pulled up shortly after. Red and blue lights flickered against the cafe windows. The short burst of a siren scattered a flock of pigeons from the sidewalk. Gravel crunched under heavy boots. Deputy Owen Blake stepped out. Young, white, clean uniform, stiff posture. The kind of officer who still walked like he was trying to prove something. He didn't go inside first. He went straight to Preston. Preston was still leaning against his Escalade, arms crossed, phone in hand. He saw the deputy and smiled, not a nervous smile, a welcoming one, like he had been expecting room service. "Officer, glad you're here." Preston extended his hand. Blake shook it without hesitation. "What happened, sir?" Preston tilted his head toward the cafe. "That woman in there caused a scene. Bumped into me, spilled coffee all over my jacket. When I asked her to be careful, she got aggressive, started yelling. The owner kicked me out for defending myself." Blake nodded slowly. He didn't write anything down. He didn't ask for another version. He just nodded. "She's still inside? By the window. Cream cardigan. You can't miss her." Deputy Blake walked into the cafe. The bell jingled. Every head turned. Irene was still in her chair. Maeve had brought her a damp towel. The young woman with curly hair was sitting beside her, holding her hand. Irene's cardigan was soaked dark brown from the chest down. Her glasses sat crooked on her nose. The cracked photograph of Robert was face down on the table, drying on a napkin. Blake looked at her. He looked at the puddle of coffee still on the floor. He looked at the empty cup sitting upside down on the table. Then he said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." Irene blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your ID, ma'am." "Driver's license." Maeve stepped forward. "Deputy, she's the victim here. That man out there threw coffee on her. I saw the whole thing. I'm the one who called you." Blake held up one hand without looking at Maeve. "Ma'am, I need to hear from both parties. That's standard procedure." Irene reached into her handbag with shaking fingers. She pulled out her wallet. She handed over her Virginia driver's license. Blake studied it. He tilted it under the light. He looked at Irene's face, then back at the card, then at her face again, like he was searching for a mismatch that didn't exist. "Sit tight," he said. He walked back outside. Through the window, Irene watched Blake hand her license to Preston. Preston looked at it, smirked, and said something that made the deputy chuckle. Maeve's face went red. "He just showed that man your license," she whispered. "That's not right, Irene. That is not right." Irene said nothing. She folded her hands in her lap. Her fingers were still trembling. Shortly after, Blake came back inside. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step outside so we can sort this out." "Sort what out?" Irene's voice was barely above a whisper. He poured coffee on me. I'm sitting here soaked. What exactly is there to sort out? Both parties have different accounts. I need to take your statements outside. Both parties? Maeve's voice cracked. I watched him dump that cup on her lap. There are witnesses sitting right here. Blake turned to Maeve. His expression was flat, professional, completely empty. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I need to follow the procedure. Please, let me do my job. Irene stood up slowly. She picked up the photograph of Robert. She tucked it carefully into her handbag. She straightened her soaked cardigan with both hands, and she walked outside with her chin raised. The sunlight hit her face. The autumn breeze caught the smell of damp coffee on wet wool. The farmer's market music drifted from 2 blocks away. Banjo and fiddle. Cheerful and completely wrong for this moment. Preston was waiting in the parking lot, arms crossed, grinning. There she is, he said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Blake positioned Irene on one side of the lot and Preston on the other. But Preston didn't stay on his side. He strolled closer, step by step, until he was near enough for Irene to see the flecks of gold in his watch. You know how much this blazer cost? Preston tugged at his sleeve. It probably costs more than you make in a month on your little pension. Irene didn't respond. What's the matter? Nothing smart to say now? He leaned in closer. Good. You should have kept that mouth shut from the start. Blake stood 10 feet away, scribbling on his notepad. He heard every single word. He did not look up. Preston began circling Irene slowly, like she was something on display. You know what the real problem is? People like you show up in places you have no business being. You take up space. You make everything uncomfortable. And when somebody finally says something, oh, suddenly you're the victim. Irene's hands tightened around her handbag strap. Her knuckles went pale. Go back to wherever you came from, sweetheart. That's my friendly advice. A couple walking their dog stopped on the sidewalk and stared. A man loading groceries into his truck froze. A teenager sitting on a bench across the street quietly raised her phone and pressed record. Nobody noticed her. Then, a white Mercedes pulled into the lot. The door swung open and out stepped Brooke Langford, blonde highlights, oversized sunglasses, a camel-colored coat. She walked straight to Preston and kissed his cheek. What happened, babe? Preston tilted his head toward Irene. This woman attacked me in the cafe, ruined my blazer. Now the owner's siding with her. Brooke looked at Irene. She didn't see the soaked cardigan. She didn't see the shaking hands or the swollen eyes. She didn't see decades of teaching or the cracked photo of a dead husband tucked inside a worn leather bag. She saw exactly what Preston wanted her to see. Officer, Brooke said, turning to Blake with a polished smile. My husband is a very important figure in this community. He's a major donor to the sheriff's benevolent fund. I'm sure this can be handled quickly and appropriately. Blake straightened up. Yes, ma'am. Just finishing the report now. Irene stood completely alone, coffee drying stiff on her clothes, autumn sun warming a face that had gone cold from the inside. Not one person, not the deputy, not the husband, not the wife, had asked if she was hurt. Blake walked over to Irene with his notepad open. Ma'am, I'm writing up a disturbance report. Both parties may be cited for disorderly conduct. Irene looked at him. Her voice came out steady and quiet, broken somewhere deep that didn't show on the surface. He threw coffee on me, deputy, in front of a room full of people, and you're going to cite me? I'm documenting what both sides reported. There aren't two sides. There's a man who poured a cup of coffee on an elderly woman, and there's that woman standing right in front of you, still wet. Blake paused. His pen hovered over the paper. For a half second, something flickered behind his eyes, something that almost looked like doubt. Then, Preston's voice rang out from across the lot. Officer, are we about done here? I've got a meeting. Blake clicked his pen shut. Sit tight, ma'am. I'll be right back. He walked toward Preston. Irene stood alone against the brick wall of the café. The breeze picked up. It carried the distant sound of that banjo. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed. Irene reached into her handbag. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts to one name. She pressed call. 2 rings. Hey, Mama. Her voice cracked for the very first time. Garrett, honey, I need you. I'm at Maeve's. A pause. Just a second. But in that single second, something shifted on the other end of the line. The warmth in her son's voice disappeared. It was replaced by something harder, something forged in 2 decades of service, discipline, and controlled fury. Don't move, Mama. I'm on my way. She hung up. She slipped the phone back into her bag. She wiped her eyes once with the back of her hand. Then she straightened her stained cardigan, lifted her chin, and waited. Preston glanced over from across the lot. He saw the old woman by the wall, still wet, still quiet, still clutching that cracked leather handbag like it was the only thing in this world keeping her upright. He smirked and looked away. He had absolutely no idea what he had just set into motion. Yo, I gotta pause real quick because, this ain't sitting right with me at all. A grown man doing this to somebody's grandma and the cop just standing there vibing? I'm heated. Like genuinely heated. Y'all better keep watching because something's coming. Some time passed. Irene didn't move from that wall. She stood with her back straight and her eyes forward. The coffee had dried into stiff brown streaks down her cardigan. Her fingers were still wrapped around the strap of her handbag. Preston was leaning on his Escalade, scrolling his phone, laughing at something on the screen. Brooke stood beside him, reapplying her lipstick in the side mirror. Deputy Blake was leaning against his patrol car, filling out paperwork like this was just another call. Nobody was watching the road. Then came the sound, a low rumble, deep, steady. The kind of engine note that doesn't come from a civilian vehicle. A black Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows and federal government plates turned the corner onto Main Street. It rolled slowly past the farmer's market, past the brick front shops, past the little café with the chalkboard menu. It pulled into the parking lot and stopped. The engine cut off. For full seconds, nothing happened. The door didn't open. No one stepped out. The lot went quiet. Even the banjo music from the market seemed to fade. Preston glanced up from his phone. Brooke lowered her lipstick. Deputy Blake stopped writing. Then the driver's door opened. A boot hit the pavement, black leather polished to a mirror shine. Then the second boot. Then he stood. Colonel Garrett Whitaker rose to his full height, in full United States Army dress uniform, dark green jacket pressed razor sharp, rows of ribbons lined across his chest, Bronze Star Meritorious Service Medal Army Commendation with oak leaf clusters, Silver Eagle insignia gleamed on each shoulder. His cover sat perfectly straight on his head. His jaw was set like concrete. He closed the door behind him with a slow, deliberate click. The parking lot went dead silent. A woman on the sidewalk stopped mid-step. The man loading groceries set down his bag. The teenager with her phone still recording nearly dropped it. Garrett didn't scan the lot. He didn't look at Preston. He didn't look at the deputy or the Mercedes or the Escalade parked sideways across two spots. He looked only at his mother. He walked toward her, each step measured, each step controlled. His shoes made no sound on the gravel. The ribbons on his chest caught the morning sun and threw tiny flashes of color across the brick wall behind Irene. Irene saw him and her whole body softened. Her shoulders dropped, her grip on the handbag loosened, her chin trembled once, just once, and then held. Garrett, she whispered. He reached her. He looked at the coffee stains down her chest. He looked at the smudged glasses sitting crooked on her nose. He looked at the dried tear tracks on her cheeks. He gently lifted her hand and turned it over. Her fingers were still shaking. His jaw tightened so hard, a vein surfaced along his temple. He put both arms around her. She pressed her face into the chest of his uniform. Her small frame nearly disappeared inside his. He held her. No words, just breath. Then he let go. He straightened up, and he turned around. Preston's smirk was gone. Completely gone. His phone was frozen halfway to his pocket. His mouth hung slightly open. His eyes moved from the ribbons to the insignia, to the government plates on the Suburban, and the color drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. Brooke took a half step backward. Her sunglasses slid down her nose. She didn't push them back up. Deputy Blake dropped his pen. Garrett walked to the center of the parking lot. He stopped exactly between his mother and Preston. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm Colonel Garrett Whitaker, Judge Advocate General's Corps, United States Army. He paused. Let it land. Who threw coffee on my mother? Preston's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Look, it was a misunderstanding, man. She bumped into me, and I didn't ask for your version. Garrett's voice was level, calm, the kind of calm that makes your stomach drop. I asked who did it. He turned to the cafe door. Maeve was standing there, arms crossed, eyes red. Maeve, tell me what happened. Maeve told him everything. Every word Preston said, every drop of coffee, the napkin thrown at Irene's face, the handbag dumped on the floor, and the photograph of Roberts soaking in a brown puddle. Garrett listened without moving, without blinking. Then he turned back to Preston. What you did today constitutes assault and battery under Virginia code. His voice carried across the entire lot. Given the racial language multiple witnesses have reported, you people go back where you came from. Sticky fingers. This may qualify for hate crime enhancement. Preston's face went white. Paper white. I never said. That's not what I also serve on the board of the Virginia Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund. Garrett took one step closer. So I'd choose my next words very carefully if I were you. Preston said nothing. For the first time all morning, Preston Langford had absolutely nothing to say. Behind Garrett, the teenager across the street was still recording. Her phone caught everything. The uniform, the insignia, the moment Preston's arrogance collapsed in on itself like a building with no foundation. Brooke was already backing toward her Mercedes. Garrett pulled out his phone. He dialed a number from memory. Not emergency services. A direct line. This is Colonel Whitaker. I need the watch commander at the Collinsville County Sheriff's Office. Yes, I'll hold on. Preston took a step backward. His heel caught the curb and he stumbled. He didn't fall, but the stumble was enough. Everyone in that parking lot saw it. The man who had towered over Irene minutes ago was now shrinking. Yes, sir. I'm at Maeve's Roost on Main Street. There's been an assault on an elderly woman. I have multiple witnesses and video evidence. I'd like a senior officer dispatched immediately. Your deputy on scene may need supervisory support. Deputy Blake's face went gray. He looked down at his notepad. The words he had written suddenly seemed very small. Shortly after, a second patrol car pulled in. The door opened and out stepped Sergeant Harlan Brooks, tall, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, a man who had clearly been doing this job for a very long time. He walked straight to Garrett. They shook hands. Firm. Familiar. Colonel Whitaker. Been a while. Sergeant Brooks. Wish it were better circumstances. They knew each other from veterans events, community fundraisers, the kind of mutual respect that doesn't need explanation. Garrett walked Brooks through the situation, calmly, precisely, like a man delivering a briefing. Maeve confirmed every detail. The young woman with curly hair added what she had seen. 2 other cafe patrons who had followed the crowd outside offered their accounts. Then the teenager with the phone stepped forward. I got it all on video, she said, from the moment he started yelling at her in the parking lot. Everything. Brooks took the phone. He watched footage. His expression didn't change, but his grip on the phone tightened. He handed it back. Thank you, miss. I'll need a copy of that. Then Brooks turned to Preston. Preston was standing by his Escalade, arms no longer crossed, hands at his sides. His blazer was unbuttoned. His silver watch caught the light. But it didn't look impressive anymore. It looked like costume jewelry on a man playing dress-up. Mr. Langford. Preston straightened. Sergeant. Listen, this has been completely blown out of proportion. I'd like to, sir, you're under arrest for assault and battery. The words landed like a hammer on glass. You can't be serious. Preston's voice pitched upward. Do you know who I am? I'm a major developer in this town. I donate to the sheriffs. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Langford. Brooks' voice was flat and final. Turn around, please. This is insane. I want my lawyer. You'll have access to your attorney at the station. Turn around. Preston looked at Garrett, then at Blake, then at the crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk. People now, some holding phones, all watching. He turned around. Brooks pulled Preston's wrists behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut. 2 sharp metallic snaps that echoed across the quiet lot. Preston flinched at the sound like it burned him. Brooke rushed forward. Officer, please, there has to be some mistake. My husband would never. Brooks didn't look at her. Ma'am, you're welcome to meet your husband at the station. Brooks' mouth opened, then closed. Her chin crumpled. She turned and walked quickly to her Mercedes. Not because she felt sorry for Irene, because people were watching. Brooks guided Preston into the back of the patrol car. Preston ducked his head, not by choice. The door shut with a heavy thud. Through the window, his face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes darting. He looked small behind that glass. Brooks turned to Deputy Blake. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Owen, a word. They stepped aside. Brooks spoke quietly. Blake's face drained of what little color it had left. We're going to review your body camera footage, and then we're going to have a very long conversation about how you handled this today. Blake said nothing. He stared at the ground. Back by the cafe wall, Irene sat on the wooden bench. Garrett was beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Maeve had brought out a fresh cup of decaf and a new blueberry scone. The young woman with curly hair was still there, standing quietly nearby, like a gentle guard. Irene held the warm cup with both hands. Steam drifted up past her face. She looked at the patrol car where Preston sat behind the glass. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She looked down at her cup and whispered to no one in particular, "I just wanted my Saturday morning, baby. That's all." Garrett pulled her a little closer. He kissed the top of her head. "I know, Mama, I know." The video hit the internet that evening. The teenager, her name was Riley, posted a clip on social media. She didn't add music. She didn't add filters. She didn't need to. The raw footage spoke for itself. Preston Langford's voice, loud and clear, telling an elderly woman to go back where she came from, his finger pointing in her face, his wife smiling beside him, a deputy doing nothing, and then the Suburban pulling in. The boots, the uniform, the ribbons. By later that night, the video had spread widely. The hashtag started small, a handful of local accounts sharing the clip with a single line, #JusticeForIrene. By the next day, it was trending in Virginia. By the following morning, it was national. Natalie Brooks, a reporter from the regional NBC affiliate, was the first journalist on the ground. She showed up at Maeve's roost on the next day with a camera crew. Maeve gave her full account on camera. Steady voice, wet eyes. "That woman has been coming here every Saturday for years," Maeve said. "She has never raised her voice. She has never caused a single problem. And that man treated her like she was garbage on her shoe." 3 other witnesses agreed to go on camera. Their stories matched. Every detail. The coffee, the napkin, the photograph of Robert on the wet floor. Then Natalie sat down with Irene. Irene wore a navy blue dress. Her hair was neatly pinned. She had new reading glasses. Garrett had driven her to pick them out the day before. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, the same way she had sat in that café. She didn't cry on camera. She didn't raise her voice. She simply told the truth. "I walked in that morning expecting nothing more than a cup of coffee and a blueberry scone. I walked out soaking wet with a cracked photograph of my late husband, wondering what I did wrong." She paused. "The answer is nothing. I didn't do anything wrong." The interview aired soon after. It was picked up by national networks shortly after, and then the digging began. Investigative journalists pulled Preston Langford's business records. What they found turned a local incident into a national scandal. Over recent years, Preston had purchased properties in historically black neighborhoods on the east side of Collinsville. Each time the pattern was identical. He would buy the building, double the rent overnight, and issue eviction notices when tenants couldn't pay. Families that had lived in those homes for decades were pushed out in weeks. Former tenants came forward. One elderly man said Preston had told him to find somewhere more appropriate for someone like you. A single mother described being threatened with legal action when she asked for an extension. A barbershop owner who had operated on the same corner for years said Preston called his business an eyesore dragging down property values. None of them had spoken publicly before. Irene's story gave them courage. The county prosecutor's office moved fast. Preston Langford was formally charged with assault and battery under Virginia Code with a hate crime enhancement. Separately, Garrett filed a civil lawsuit on Irene's behalf through the Virginia Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund, citing physical assault, emotional distress, racial harassment, and elder abuse. Preston's attorney, a high-priced defense lawyer from Richmond, attempted to negotiate a plea deal. Misdemeanor assault, no jail time, community service, a fine. The judge reviewed the video. He reviewed the witness statements. He reviewed the pattern of behavior from the former tenants. He reviewed the body camera footage from Deputy Blake, which showed Blake laughing with Preston while Irene sat inside, soaked and shaking. The plea deal was rejected. The trial lasted days. The prosecution played Riley's video in full. They played Maeve's call for help. They brought witnesses to the stand. They showed photographs of Irene's stained cardigan, her cracked reading glasses, and the coffee-damaged photograph of Robert. Preston argued it was a momentary loss of temper, an isolated incident, a man under business pressure who reacted poorly. The prosecution responded with testimony from former tenants, separate accounts of racial intimidation, a pattern stretching back. Preston took the stand in his own defense. It lasted minutes. Under cross-examination, he contradicted himself multiple times. He claimed he never touched Irene's coffee cup. The video showed otherwise. He claimed he never used racially charged language. Witnesses said otherwise. He claimed Irene had been aggressive toward him first. Maeve's call, made in real time, said otherwise. The jury deliberated for hours, guilty. assault and battery with hate crime enhancement. The sentencing came later. The courtroom was packed. Local press lined the back wall. Natalie Brooks sat in the second row with her notebook open. The judge spoke directly to Preston before reading the sentence. Mr. Langford, this court has reviewed not only the events of that day, but a broader pattern of conduct that reflects a deep contempt for the dignity of others. You targeted a woman who posed no threat. You humiliated her in public. And when law enforcement arrived, you attempted to weaponize their authority against her. Or sure. Preston stood with his hands clasped in front of him. His attorney stood beside him. Neither moved. This court sentences you to time in the county detention facility. Years of supervised probation upon release. Hours of community service to be completed in the communities you displaced. Mandatory completion of a racial sensitivity and bias intervention program. And restitution to Mrs. Irene Whitaker in the amount determined by the civil proceeding. Preston's knees buckled slightly. His attorney caught his arm. In the gallery, Irene sat beside Garrett. She wore the same navy dress from her interview. Her hands were folded in her lap. Garrett's arm rested behind her on the bench. She showed no satisfaction, no triumph, just quiet, steady resolve. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Irene how she felt. Irene paused. She looked at the microphone, then past it, then at the sky. "I feel like my husband would be proud of our son," she said. "And I feel like maybe this town remembers now that everybody sitting in that cafe deserved to be there, including me." The fallout continued. Deputy Owen Blake was placed on administrative leave, pending a full internal affairs review. His body camera footage became a training case study. He eventually completed a mandatory retraining program. In a later interview, he admitted publicly that implicit bias had guided his response that morning. The county sheriff's office implemented new protocols for responding to reports involving people of color. An independent oversight committee was formed. Former tenants Preston had displaced filed their own civil suits. Brooke Langford filed for legal separation days after the verdict. Her attorney cited irreconcilable differences. The court of public opinion had a shorter phrase for it. Later after the verdict, Garrett was invited to speak at the annual Collinsville Veterans Dinner. People filled the community hall. Folding chairs, paper tablecloths, the smell of roast beef and cheap coffee drifting from the kitchen. American flags lined the walls. A brass band played softly in the corner. When Garrett stepped to the podium, the room went quiet. He didn't talk about his career. He didn't mention his rank or his medals or the years he had spent serving overseas. He didn't talk about the trial. He talked about his mother. "When I was a boy, my father died," he said. "Cancer. He was a postal carrier, worked days a week for years. Never missed a route." He paused. The room didn't breathe. After he passed, my mother didn't stop. She got up the next morning and went to school. She taught kids how to read that year. She came home, made dinner, checked my homework, and ironed my clothes for the next day. She did that every single day for the next years. His voice stayed steady. His hands rested on the sides of the podium. "She never told me the world owed me anything. She never told me it would be fair. She told me to stand up straight, speak clearly, and treat every person I meet with the same respect I want for myself." He looked down for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. The hardest part of that day at the cafe wasn't confronting the man who hurt her. It wasn't the arrest. It wasn't the trial. He swallowed. It was seeing my mother on her knees on a wet tile floor, picking up a cracked photograph of my father while a room full of people watched and said nothing. The room was silent. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes with a napkin. A retired Marine at the back table pressed his lips together and nodded once. Garrett stepped away from the podium. He didn't wait for applause. He walked straight to the table where Irene sat, pulled out the chair beside her, and took her hand. The room rose to its feet. Life in Collinsville slowly returned to its rhythm. The farmers' market still ran every Saturday morning. The banjo player is still set up on the corner. Maeve still opened the cafe early, and Irene still walked in at her usual time. Same cream cardigan. New one. A gift from Garrett. Same beaded glasses chain. Same small decaf with cream. Same blueberry scone. But things were different now. People greeted her by name, not just the regulars. Everyone. The new couple who moved in down the street. The teenager who used to sit on the bench across the road. The mail carrier who had taken over Robert's old route years ago. Children waved at her through the window. Maeve hung a small frame photograph near the register. Irene and Garrett side by side, taken the Saturday after the incident. Irene was smiling. Garrett had his arm around her. Behind them, the chalkboard menu still listed the same specials. Underneath the frame, Maeve had written in her careful handwriting, "Everybody belongs here." Irene used every dollar from the restitution to create the Whitaker Family Scholarship, a fund for first-generation college students in Collinsville. The first 2 recipients were announced that spring. One was the daughter of a barber whose shop Preston had shut down. The other was Riley, the teenager who had pressed the record. Irene handed them each a letter at the ceremony. Inside, she had written the same line to both of them. "Your voice matters. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like it doesn't." Okay, but yes, this story is made up, but bro, the feeling of someone treating you like you're invisible, that's way too real. And low-key, what messes me up the most isn't dudes like Preston. It's everyone else in that cafe just sitting there doing nothing. Come on. So let me ask you this. If you were sitting in that cafe that Saturday morning and you saw a man pour coffee on an elderly woman, what would you have done? Would you have stood up? Would you have said something? Or would you have looked away and hoped someone else would handle it? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it. Every single one. And if this story made you feel something, if it made your chest tight, or your jaw clench, or your eyes sting, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because we're not done telling these stories. Not even close. Stand up for someone today, even if your voice shakes, especially then.